Hoboken was New Jersey's grittiest city, and in Jersey that's saying something. Now it's gentrified as the Mile Square City. It also has some history. In 1846, the first baseball game between the Knickerbockers and the New York Nine was played at the Elysian Fields here. In 1915, a kid named Francis Albert Sinatra was born here in Hoboken. Then in 1954, the multi-Academy Award-winning film On the Waterfront was filmed here. But long before those memorable events, Hoboken was home to America's first family of engineers. Colonel John Stevens and the three of his sons, John Cox Stevens, Robert Livingston Stevens, and Edwin Augustus Stevens. Welcome. I'm Richard Reeves, and I'd like to tell you more about the Stevens family, their remarkable achievements, and their lasting legacy. A compelling case can be made that Colonel John Stevens was to the beginning of the 19th century what Thomas Edison was to its end. Moreover, the story of the Stevens clan is the story of America. Here's how it all began. The first John Stevens, Colonel John's grandfather, left England for America as an indentured 17-year-old. That was in 1699. He clerked for Barna Cosins, Crown Attorney in the province of New York. Married to Anne Campbell in 1714, they settled in Amboy, the capital of East Jersey, where her father was Justice of the Court of Common Rights. He was an early advocate for better roads and better ferries at a time when travel by stage from New York to Philadelphia took 30 to 40 hours. Their second son, the Honorable John Stevens, born in 1716, married Elizabeth Alexander, bringing another Scottish clan into the family. Beginning in 1763, he served on the Governor's Council until its last meeting under Governor William Franklin, Benjamin's royalist son. He, Richard Stockton, and Lord Stirling were considered the unruly three for their leanings to the colonial side. In 1787, he presided over the New Jersey Convention called to ratify the Constitution. His quick action was responsible for New Jersey's entry as the third state in the new United States of America. John Stevens III was born June 26, 1749, in New York City, and graduated from King's College in 1768. In 1771, his sister Mary married Robert R. Livingston, then New York State's Chancellor and heir to Claremont-on-the-Hudson. On October 17, 1782, John married Rachel Cox. He was appointed New Jersey's first treasurer on July 15, 1776, and he was a captain in George Washington's army. He became known as the Treasurer on Horseback. In Colonel John's biography, Turnbull describes his role as follows. The treasurer's office was moved from place to place in the state and established wherever Colonel Stevens found a place to hang his three-cornered hat without exposing state papers and funds to the enemy's rifle shots. In 1784, Colonel John bought at public auction William Bayard's farm at Hoboken, which the state had confiscated from a Tory landowner. Stevens built an estate at Castle Point, where he and Rachel raised their 11 children and lived there until his death in 1838. Known then as the Stevens Villa, it serves as the family's home until 1851, when it was destroyed in a fire. From this site issued a series of inventions and ideas considered earth-shaking by contemporaries. Today, it serves as the home of America's Innovation University, Stevens Institute of Technology. On August 26, 1791, the United States Patent Office issued its first dozen patents, including one to Colonel John for a steam boiler. John Stevens had a close relationship with brother-in-law Robert Livingston, New York's chancellor. In 1797, Livingston obtained the passage of a law establishing a monopoly for steamboats on the water of New York State for a 14-year term. They agreed that they would use Stevens steamboats. Subsequently, President Jefferson appointed Livingston as minister to France, where he negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. There, his daughter, Harriet, John Stevens' niece, met Robert Fulton, who was experimenting with a submarine on the Seine. After losing Napoleon's backing, Fulton moved first to England, then back to New York, where he married Harriet Livingston in 1806. Livingston then reneged on his agreement with Stevens and backed his son-in-law, precipitating a family feud in the best or the worst of Scottish tradition. Colonel John built the first twin-screw propeller-driven steamboat, the Little Juliana.
He next designed a boat with twin-screw propellers in a little boat named for his eldest daughter, Juliana, in 1804. And a description of a voyage of that boat from the Battery in New York to Hoboken was given by Professor Renwick, Columbia University. He speaks of going down to the Battery Park in May 1804 and seeing there a little boat with his friend John Cox Stevens and Robert Stevens constituting the crew. And he said that after a little while the boat got underway. But what everyone wondered was what made the boat move. They couldn't see anything that propelled it. Of course, the secret was it was the screw propellers that was submerged and no one could see them.
In 1806, he designed a paddle steamer, the Phoenix, intended for passengers and freight service. The New York legislature had meanwhile granted a Hudson River monopoly to Robert Livingston, so Stevens sent his ship to the Delaware River.
They sent the Phoenix from New York to Philadelphia, or the Delaware River. All of the old skippers and seamen said that a steamboat wouldn't last 5 minutes on the ocean. And I imagine there was just a little doubt in Colonel John's mind because he sent a sailboat along with the Phoenix to pick up his son and the other members of the Phoenix crew if and when the Phoenix was knocked to pieces by the ocean. They ran into a big storm. The Phoenix put in safely to Barnegat Inlet, Barnegat Bay, and anchored there during the storm, and then had to wait several days before the sailboat came back to find her because the sailboat had been blown out to sea. It took the Phoenix about 13 days to make the voyage from Hoboken to Philadelphia. This was the first voyage of any steamboat in this world on any ocean. It antedated the voyage of the Savannah by 10 years. The Savannah was 1819. But the Phoenix went all the way from Hoboken to Philadelphia by steam. The Savannah had a steam engine and used the steam engine merely as an auxiliary in case of a calm to propel the vessel. And Ericsson, being called the inventor of the screw propeller, is the same kind of misstatement that we find in some of the early school histories that say that Fulton invented the steamboat.
In October 1811, another Stevens ship, the Juliana, began operation between Hoboken and New York as the world's first steam-powered ferry offering regularly scheduled service. At a time when New York Governor DeWitt Clinton and his allies were committed to digging the Erie Canal, connecting Albany with Lake Erie, Colonel John advocated instead for a steam railroad. His February 24, 1812 letter to the canal commissioners argued that a railroad could be built quicker for less and would carry freight faster at lower cost. His ideas were dismissed as those of a madman. The Erie Canal was built at great expense and never achieved commercial success. In February 1815, the first railroad charter in the United States was issued to Stevens, for the New Jersey Railroad, but drew little interest. In 1826, he demonstrated the feasibility of steam locomotion on a circular experimental track at First and Hudson Streets. There he ran a locomotive at the rate of 12 miles an hour. On February 4, 1830, New Jersey granted a charter for the Camden and Amboy Transportation Company. Robert was elected president and chief engineer. Edwin treasurer. Built in England by Stephenson and Company, the John Bull locomotive made its first official run on November 12, 1831. By 1837, the CNA had 15 locomotives and had merged with another railroad running from Trenton to Philadelphia. Eventually, the CNA was leased for 999 years to the Pennsylvania Railroad Company on favorable terms to the Stevens family. Colonel John Stevens is generally regarded as the father of American railroads. In 1814, with the War of 1812 raging, Colonel John's experiments with elongated shells demonstrated their superiority over cannonballs for both accuracy and destructive ability. Further tests at the New York Navy Yard confirmed their greater accuracy and range and led to orders for 5,000 shells. These results led Colonel John, Robert, and Edwin to envision an indestructible, iron-sided ship defeating the British. Their repeated efforts to interest the administration and the Navy Department fell on deaf ears. It took until 1842 and the imminent threat of war with Mexico before Congress appropriated $250,000. Thus was born the Stevens Battery, the first ironclad vessel in history. While the colonel worked in a dozen fields, his brightest dreams focused on steam transportation. As a child, the trip from New York to Philadelphia took 30 to 40 hours over poor roads. By his death in 1838, the Stevens steamboats were the fastest in America and railroad building was well underway. The same trip could now be made in reasonable comfort in 4.5 to 5.5 hours. John Cox Stevens, born in 1785, co-founded the New York Yacht Club, based at Castle Point in 1844, and served as its first Commodore. In 1850, he formed a 6-person syndicate to build a yacht with the intention of taking her to England. The Royal Yacht Club refused to race the Americans. Frustrated, younger brother Edwin Augustus nailed a challenge to the doors of the British Parliament. 7 schooners and 8 cutters assembled for a 53 nautical mile race round the Isle of Wight. In a raging gale, America won, finishing a full 24 minutes ahead of its closest rival. Watching from the royal yacht, Queen Victoria asked her boatswain who was winning. His reply, "Your Majesty, I regret to say the America." "Very well then, who's second?" His reply then was, "Madam, there is no second." The English protested that America had cheated by sailing inside the marks and between the rocks. The rules of the race simply required the boats to sail round the Isle of Wight. In a remarkable show of fairness, Queen Victoria dismissed the protest. The late Congresswoman Millicent Fenwick, born in 1910, Edwin's great-granddaughter, had this to say about the British reaction to the Stevens brothers.
But the English were quite startled by his ways, and apparently he had a spittoon in the America's Cup, and made no bones about any of what he considered to be perfectly normal behavior. I think that if he was somewhat rough, America was somewhat rough. This is the kind of nation we were. We were developing a nation in a country that was naked, empty, lacking in roads and bridges and railroads and ferries and everything else. History demands that kind of accuracy. Otherwise, we'll never understand anything about ourselves.
Robert Livingston Stevens, born in 1787, gained fame as the foremost engineer of his day, best remembered for his invention of the flanged T-rail. This new shape did away with the clamps or chairs that were needed to hold the Birkinshaw rail upright, a more cost-effective solution, an engineering triumph. He also found that rails laid on wooden ties with crushed stone or gravel beneath provided a roadbed superior to those used before. His rail and roadbed came into universal use in the United States and are still in use today. Robert also added the pilot or the cowcatcher to the locomotive's front end to improve stability rounding curves, and he increased the number of drive wheels to 8 for better traction. In 1853, he built the Stevens Castle, a 40-room Victorian mansion. It served as a Stevens family home until 1911, when it was sold to Stevens Institute of Technology. Colonel John entrusted Edwin Augustus Stevens, who had been born in 1795, with the family business affairs. Then in 1821, he assumed full responsibility for the Stevens estate in Hoboken and other properties. Edwin developed the closed fire room system of forced draft for his family's steamboat fleet and the vestibule car for the Camden and Amboy Railroad. The airtight fire room was used by all of the world's navies by the late 19th century. Edwin and his brother Robert worked on an 1842 commission to construct the nation's first ironclad naval vessel. Though the craft was never fully completed, it laid the groundwork for the modern armored warship. A scaled-down version, the USS Naugatuck, cruised at 11 miles an hour and saw considerable service during the Civil War. After the war, the Naugatuck and the battery were sold for scrap. The story of America's first family of engineers still inspires new generations of aspiring engineers. Their remarkable record of accomplishments in marine design, steam propulsion, and railroading remain unmatched. Their vision is perpetuated in the work of the world's first school of mechanical engineering, Stevens Institute of Technology, America's Innovation University.
There's a college of engineering that is known as the Old Stone Mill. Every board of it is dear to a Stevens engineer, from the shop to the castle on the hill. And where the sons and daughters gather, you can bet your life they'll say, the engineers are in the lead again today. Stevens, we're through, went to the old red and gray. Stevens, we are going to raise your colors high, we're going to raise your colors high today. I'm a rambling wreck from Stevens Tech, a mechanical engineer. We can hear that old song still, and it means